The river rolled by, indifferent. Its gray-brown water, swollen and cold, carried debris from some upstream sorrow, broken branches, tufts of dead grass, the occasional, chilling glimpse of something unidentifiable beneath the surface. Eliza huddled on the muddy bank, the last vestiges of her shawl pulled tight around shoulders that felt brittle as dry twigs. The wind, sharp with the coming bite of true winter, whipped strands of matted hair across her face, stinging tears from tired eyes. She had been there 2 days, maybe 3. Time had lost its meaning somewhere between the gnawing ache in her belly and the deeper, more profound emptiness left by Mam's passing. The wagon, their home, had splintered and sunk after a wheel broke crossing the shallows just upstream, taking their meager possessions and the last tangible link to a life that was no more. Now, nothing but the clothes on her back, thin and damp, and a dread that settled heavy as river stones in her chest. Orphaned, alone, 12 years old and invisible in a world that had no mercy for the lost. The few souls who had passed on the distant track had either averted their gaze or offered only hard stares, seeing not a child in distress, but a burden, a potential thief, an unwanted complication in their own difficult journeys. Despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her, urging her to simply lie back against the cold earth and let the indifferent sky claim her. Her fingers, numb and raw, scraped feebly at the damp soil, as if searching for roots, for purchase, for anything solid in the dissolving reality of her existence. The smell of damp earth and decay hung heavy in the air, a fitting perfume for her circumstances. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound that felt too loud in the vast silence of the river valley. Every muscle ached. Every breath felt thin and sharp. She was adrift, anchored only by a fading, instinctual refusal to simply cease. Hunger clawed at her, a constant, grinding pain. Fear was a colder, more insidious enemy, whispering of the coming night, of unseen eyes in the shadows, of a future that stretched out as an endless, terrifying void. She closed her eyes, trying to summon the memory of Mam's face, of her warm hands, of the lullabies that used to chase the darkness away. But the image was fading, like smoke in the wind, leaving her more alone than before. A sound startled her, not the wind, not the river. A deliberate step on gravel. Her eyes snapped open. Standing on the track above the bank, silhouetted against the pale, washed-out sky, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the look of one who spent his life outdoors. His clothes were plain, worn but sturdy, his face shadowed by the brim of a battered hat. He wasn't looking away like the others. He was looking directly at her. A fresh wave of fear, sharp and cold, pierced through her torpor. She instinctively recoiled, pressing herself further into the muddy bank, trying to melt into the earth. He remained still, silent, simply watching. His stillness was unnerving. Was he going to hurt her? Run her off? Demand something? The questions tumbled through her mind, each one a barb. She waited, breath held tight in her lungs, her small body tensed for flight or confrontation, though she had no strength for either. The man didn't move for a long moment, an eternity in the span of her racing heart. Then, slowly, deliberately, he began to descend the bank towards her. He stopped a few yards away, his presence commanding yet strangely quiet. His eyes, when she finally dared to meet them beneath the hat brim, were the color of river stone, gray and hard, but held a depth she couldn't decipher. There was no immediate threat in them, but no kindness either. Just a steady, assessing gaze that seemed to see right through her tattered clothes to the trembling child beneath. He carried nothing in his hands. He didn't speak. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Eliza hugged herself tighter, her gaze fixed on him, searching for a sign, any sign. The wind rustled the dry leaves in the few scrubby bushes clinging to the bank. The river murmured its endless song of passage. He lowered himself carefully to the ground, a little distance away, cross-legged, his movements economical and deliberate. He didn't offer a hand, didn't move closer. He just sat, a solid, unmoving presence against the shifting backdrop of the river. This unexpected inaction confused Eliza more than any threat might have. Why was he just sitting there, waiting? For what? She didn't understand. Her mind, dulled by hunger and fear, struggled to process this new variable. She watched him, wary as a trapped animal. He didn't look directly at her now. His gaze cast downstream, towards the horizon where the pale sky met the land. He seemed content to simply be there. After another long stretch of silence, he reached into a pouch on his belt and took something out. Eliza's eyes fixed on his hands. It was a strip of dried meat jerky. He didn't hold it out to her. He just bit off a piece and chewed slowly, his gaze still on the river. The smell of the meat, faint but distinct, reached her on the wind, igniting a desperate, almost unbearable pang of hunger. Her stomach cramped violently. She swallowed hard, her mouth dry. She tore her eyes away from the meat, ashamed of the raw need it betrayed. She looked back at the river, trying to regain some semblance of dignity, or what little was left of it. He finished the piece, took another, then paused. Without looking at her, he tossed the remaining strip of jerky onto the mud between them. It landed with a soft thud. He didn't say a word. He simply resumed watching the river. Eliza stared at the meat. It lay there, a small, dark offering on the gray mud. Was it a test? A trap? Her fear warred with the screaming need in her belly. She hesitated, trembling. It felt dangerous to take it, dangerous to trust. But the hunger was a more immediate, brutal master than her fear of this silent man. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out a trembling hand. Her fingers brushed against the cold, dry surface of the meat. She snatched it up quickly, as if expecting him to suddenly withdraw it. She brought it to her mouth, tearing at it with her teeth, the tough texture unfamiliar, the salty taste a shock to her deprived senses. It wasn't much, but it was something. He remained silent, his gaze still fixed on the river. He didn't watch her eat. He simply let her be. It was the first act of unsolicited, unobserved generosity she had received in what felt like a lifetime. It was a small thing, but in the vast, cold landscape of her despair, it felt monumental. It chipped away, just slightly, at the solid block of her fear, replacing it with a fragile, bewildering uncertainty. What did he want? Days blurred into a strange, silent rhythm. The man, who she learned through a single, quiet question was named Silas, didn't leave. He camped a short distance away, maintaining a respectful, almost distant presence. He didn't invite her to join him, didn't press conversation. But each day he shared what he had. A portion of roasted rabbit, a handful of foraged berries, another strip of jerky. He would place the food within her reach and then turn away, giving her the space she needed to take it without feeling observed or indebted. He mended his gear, sharpened his knife, tended a small, efficient fire when the nights grew colder. He seemed entirely self-sufficient, a part of the landscape rather than a trespasser upon it. Eliza, wary but no longer paralyzed by fear, began to watch him. She saw the quiet competence in his hands, the way his eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, the economy of his movements. He never wasted effort. He was quiet, almost unnervingly so, but his silence wasn't empty. It felt deliberate, watchful. She learned things just by observing. How to build a fire that held against the wind. How to spot the signs of small game. How to listen to the sounds of the river and the woods. She didn't ask questions, and he offered no instruction. It was a silent apprenticeship, born of proximity and necessity. Her initial terror had slowly subsided, replaced by a deep-seated wariness and a growing, reluctant curiosity. Who was he? Why was he here, camping by the river? Why did he share his food with a child he didn't know? A child who had nothing to offer in return. He remained an enigma, a solid, quiet presence in her dissolving world. She still slept separate, wrapped in her thin, damp clothes, but the gnawing terror of being utterly alone in the vast, dark night had lessened. His fire was a beacon, his quiet movements a reassurance that she wasn't the only living soul for miles around. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled, whipping the river into a frenzy. Rain lashed down, cold and relentless. Eliza huddled miserably against the bank, the thin fabric of her dress offering no protection. She saw Silas quickly pack his minimal camp, then retreat towards a small overhang of rocks upstream that she hadn't noticed before. He disappeared under it. She remained where she was, miserable and exposed. She didn't dare presume. She wasn't his responsibility. She was nothing to him. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. She flinched, whimpering softly. A moment later, a figure appeared at the edge of the overhang. Silas. He stood there, silhouetted against the stormy sky, looking towards her. He didn't call out. He simply waited. It was not an invitation offered in words, but in presence, in simply being visible and still. After a moment's hesitation, driven by the raw, primal need for shelter from the biting rain and wind, Eliza pushed herself up, her limbs stiff and cold. She stumbled towards the overhang. As she approached, he stepped aside, making room for her in the small, dry space. He didn't speak. She ducked under the rock, the sudden cessation of rain a profound relief. The air under the overhang was warmer, dry. He was already settling down, wrapping himself in a simple, thick blanket. He had another, folded neatly beside him. Without a word, he pushed it towards her. She stared at the blanket, then at him. His face was unreadable in the dim light under the overhang. It was clean, dry wool, a luxury she hadn't known since Mam was alive. Hesitantly, she reached for it, her fingers closing around the rough, comforting fabric. She pulled it around herself, the warmth spreading through her chilled body, chasing away the deep-seated cold that had become her constant companion. It felt like a shield, a small piece of safety in the chaos of the storm. She sat huddled in the blanket, watching the rain fall in sheets outside. Silas was already still, his breathing slow and even. He hadn't asked for anything, hadn't made her feel like a burden. He had simply shared what he had. In the oppressive silence of the storm, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the rush of the river, a fragile seed of trust began to take root in the barren ground of her heart. She still didn't know him, not truly, but he had offered warmth, shelter, and sustenance when the world had offered only indifference or hardship. He had seen her, truly seen her vulnerability, and responded not with pity, but with quiet, practical aid. It was a different kind of strength than any she had encountered before, not born of aggression or control, but of silent capability and a strange, passive kindness. She finally allowed herself to sleep, the sounds of the storm muted by the rock, the presence of the man beside her a silent, comforting weight. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and crisp. The river was higher, faster. As they sat by the fire, the silence between them felt different, less charged with wariness, more with quiet understanding. Eliza found herself speaking, her voice hesitant at first, telling him about Mam, about the wagon, about being alone. He listened, not interrupting, his gaze steady. He didn't offer platitudes, just a quiet presence that absorbed her words. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "It's a hard road," he said, his voice low and gravelly. It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone else had offered acknowledgement of her pain, not dismissal of it. In the weeks that followed, their silent partnership deepened. He taught her practical skills, setting snares, identifying edible plants, tracking. She, in turn, with the resilience of youth, began to shed the layers of fear and despair, her spirit slowly rekindling like embers coaxed back to life. She was still quiet, marked by her experiences, but she moved with more purpose, her eyes brighter, her body stronger. Then the outside world intruded. Two men, rough-looking and smelling of stale whiskey, rode up to the riverbank. They saw Silas, alone except for the girl, and saw an opportunity. They were aggressive, demanding, circling Silas like vultures. Eliza's old fear flared, but this time, it was mixed with a fierce, protective anger towards the man who had sheltered her. She stood close to Silas, not hiding, her small fists clenched. The men grew bolder, dismounting, one reaching for Silas. Silas moved with surprising speed, a blur of quiet force. There was no wasted movement, no shouted threats, just swift, efficient action. In moments, one man was on the ground, winded. The other found himself disarmed and looking into Silas's unyielding eyes. Silas spoke, his voice still low, but carrying an authority that brooked no argument. He didn't hurt them more than necessary, simply disarmed them and sent them scrambling back to their horses with a clear, final warning. Eliza watched, breathless. He wasn't just capable, he was formidable. When they were gone, Silas turned to Eliza. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than stoicism in his eyes, a quiet reassurance, a recognition of her own quiet courage in standing by him. The threat had come and gone, but it had solidified something essential between them. They weren't just two solitary figures sharing a riverbank. They were two souls who had found a fragile, profound connection in the wilderness. The world was still hard, full of unknowns and dangers, but she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Her journey from a terrified, abandoned child had led her here, not to rescue in the form she might have once imagined, but to a partnership built on shared hardship, silent respect, and the quiet strength found in unexpected connection. The river still flowed, indifferent, but now, she watched it flow not with despair, but with a quiet determination, ready to face whatever it carried downstream, knowing she wouldn't face it alone.